They hand you a knife before they hand you a husband. That's the first thing nobody tells you about being born into a samurai family in Edo, Japan. The wedding comes later, the blade comes first. You are born in 1650, the daughter of a minor samurai retainer in Edo. Your father serves a feudal lord. Your mother runs the household with the precision of a military campaign, because in a samurai house, that is exactly what it is. By age 5, you already know the word kaiken. It is a small dagger, shorter than your forearm. You will own one before you own a doll. By age 7, your mother begins your real education. Not reading first, not music first. First, how to sit so that your spine never touches the back of a chair, because comfort is something your family does not have time to teach you. By age 10, you learn the tea ceremony, calligraphy, poetry, the koto. These are not hobbies. They are the visible parts of your worth, the parts that a future husband's family will inspect the way a merchant inspects silk. Bend the fabric to the light, look for flaws, price accordingly. By age 12, you learn the part nobody writes on the marriage contract. Your mother sits you down one afternoon with the kaiken resting in her open palm. She explains, in the same calm voice she uses for tea, what it is for. If your husband is captured in battle and faces public humiliation, you may be expected to die before the dishonor reaches your children. If your house faces ruin that cannot be undone, you may be expected to die before the shame spreads to your family's name. If you yourself face capture by an enemy of your husband's lord, you are expected to use this blade on your own throat, in a single clean motion, with your knees bound together first, so that even in death your legs do not fall open, and dishonor the name of every person connected to you. You are 12 years old. She places the dagger back in your hands. You practice the motion, without the blade, many times. Your mother watches, corrects, repeats. She says, practice is mercy. A woman who has never rehearsed her own death hesitates when the moment comes. Hesitation is worse than the act itself. You do not cry during this lesson. You have already learned that tears are also a kind of hesitation, and hesitation in this house is not something you are allowed. At 16, you are married, not to someone you love, not to someone you have spoken to more than twice, to a samurai named Kenji, 11 years older than you, chosen by your father and his father over documents and agreements, while you sat in another room embroidering silk, not asked, not consulted, not informed, until the decision was complete. His family sends a formal inspection party first. 3 women who look at your hands, your posture, your teeth, your gait. They watch you pour tea. They watch you bow. They watch you stand back up without using your hands. Then they leave, and a week later, your father tells you the match is accepted. You pack what you own. It is not very much. Kenji is quiet. He does not raise his voice. He does not smile easily. You spend the first year of your marriage trying to understand whether the silence means he is content or simply elsewhere. You learn quickly that your value in this household is measured in 3 columns. First column, can you manage the household accounts without error? Second column, can you produce a son? Third column, can you carry yourself in public and in front of guests in a way that brings no visible shame to his name? Love is not one of the 3 columns. If it appears, it is a private gift, not a household requirement. You give birth to a daughter first. The midwife's face tells you everything before she speaks. 18 months later, you give birth to a son. The relief in the house is so total that for one single week, you allow yourself to believe you have earned something permanent. You have not, because permanent does not exist in a samurai house. It only exists in the distance between wars. When you are 24, the political arrangement that keeps your husband's lord in power begins to fracture. A rival domain has been accumulating influence for 3 years. The balance has shifted. Kenji is sent to a forward position on the border. You are told this is an honor. You have learned by now that honor is the word they use right before they tell you something terrible. 3 months pass. No letters, then 4 months, then almost 5. On the morning the messenger arrives, you already know, before he speaks, purely from the way he holds his shoulders as he crosses the courtyard. Kenji's unit was ambushed. He was captured, not killed. The rival domain is holding him and has already begun parading him through their streets in chains, as a public demonstration of what happens to men who serve the wrong lord in the wrong season. You think of the kaiken your mother gave you, not because you intend to use it, because the situation in front of you is exactly the kind of situation your mother described, at age 12, in the same calm voice, over a cup of tea you didn't finish. The house fractures. The senior retainers argue about whether a man, who allows himself to be captured alive, has already crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. Some say his survival is already a form of failure. Some say nothing can be done until ransom negotiations begin. Nobody asks what you think. You are the one managing the household, receiving the visitors, answering the letters, maintaining the face of composure that the family requires, while men twice your age argue about whether your husband should be grieved, as if he were already dead. 6 weeks later, Kenji is ransomed. He returns thinner. He has a new scar above his left eye, and he has been changed in some way that has no polite name in any language, because some experiences do not have names, in the language of the people who survived them. The rival domain released him with one condition: the story of his capture and his chains, and his public humiliation must be documented and distributed to every domain that borders theirs. It is a diplomatic message written in one man's shame. Your husband's reputation never fully recovers. You watch a man who once walked through rooms as if the air belonged to him become someone who pauses before entering his own front door. The dishonor did not end with the ransom. It simply moved into the house, into the dinner table silence, into the way his son watches him from across the room, trying to understand what changed, and not yet knowing the word for it. You are 30 now. Your son is 6. He has started training. Your daughter is 8. One evening you come home and find her alone in the sitting room, kneeling very still, knees pressed together, practicing a folding motion with her hands. Nobody told her to do this. She found the kaiken in your wardrobe. She asked her grandmother what it was for. Her grandmother, who has spent her entire life inside the same walls and the same expectations, told her the truth. The same calm voice, the same open palm. The lesson does not skip generations. You stand in the doorway and watch your 8-year-old daughter rehearse her own death with the focused seriousness you remember from your own childhood, and you understand with a clarity that takes your breath that you are not raising a daughter. You are passing on a set of tools for surviving a world that was built before she was born and will not change because she finds it difficult. You think for one moment about telling her she does not have to learn this. You do not say it because you love her. And love in this house, in this century, means giving her every tool available, even the ones that cost something. So you cross the room, you sit beside her, you correct the angle of her knees, gently, the way your mother corrected yours, and you begin, in the same calm voice, to explain what the blade is for. You live to 63. The kaiken sits in its case for 47 years, and is never used. When historians write about Edo Japan, they will describe the elegance of the tea ceremony, the discipline of the Bushido code, the quiet dignity of samurai households. They will note that women of this class carried personal daggers as a sign of their honor. They will not note what the dagger cost, what it felt like to hand it to a 12-year-old, what it meant to wake up every morning in a house where the word honor was applied equally to victory and to dying correctly. They will call it a beautiful tradition. You called it Tuesday and Wednesday and every day of every year between 12 and 63, when you woke up and made tea and managed accounts and smiled at guests and loved your children enough to teach them what might save them and went to sleep still carrying the blade. You hoped you would never have to explain to anyone, and somehow never did.